My husband handed me a glass of wine, smiled across the table, and said, "We just needed to sign a standard agreement before heading out for our date night." I trusted him. I signed it without hesitation. What I didn't know was that the document secretly transferred our $29 million property empire to his mistress. What he didn't know was that I had already moved every single property, every deed, every asset, into the hands of the only person he feared in this world. Before I reveal who that was and what happened when he found out, make sure you subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about taking your power back before it's stolen. My name is Helena Ward. I am 62 years old, a mother, a grandmother, and the co-founder of one of the most profitable property empires in the state. I didn't inherit wealth. I built it. My father, Robert Kane, was a builder who never finished high school, but taught me the one skill most people never learn: how to control what you create. He used to tell me, owning land is owning power, but only if you keep that land out of untrustworthy hands. I believed him. I lived by that. The one place I never expected betrayal to come from was inside my own home. For 40 years, I was married to Daniel Ward. To the public, he was charming, generous, and loyal. People admired his confidence. They said we were the couple everyone wanted to be. They didn't see the shift that happened when our net worth climbed past 20 million. They didn't see how Daniel started obsessing over control. They didn't see how his best friend Mark Ellison, a man who claimed to be our trusted legal advisor, slowly inserted himself into every decision we made. At first, I thought it was simply the nature of running a growing business. I didn't know it was part of a plan. My daughter Vanessa, an attorney with razor-sharp instincts, had warned me. She said, "Mom, don't sign anything without me reviewing it first." But I trusted my husband. I believed that after 4 decades of marriage, love meant security. My son Christopher, however, had grown distant. Daniel often praised Christopher in public, but privately criticized him to me, planting seeds of division. I now realize Daniel was isolating me, slowly removing anyone who could challenge his decision. Our company had just closed on 3 new apartment complexes. Newspaper articles praised Daniel for his vision in real estate development. Not one of those articles mentioned that I negotiated the deals, secured the financing, and structured the ownership terms. Daniel took the credit, and I let him. I told myself it didn't matter who got the applause. What mattered was that our empire remained in our family's name. I had no idea Daniel was already working to change that. The changes were subtle at first. Daniel became unusually affectionate. He planned romantic evenings, weekend getaways, expensive gifts. He told me he wanted to refresh our marriage and focus on us. I thought we were reconnecting. In reality, he was disarming me, pulling me into comfort while positioning his mistress, Savannah, to take everything I owned. Savannah was our property manager, young, ambitious, overly involved in Daniel's day-to-day decisions. I assumed she was simply a dedicated employee. I learned the truth in the most brutal way by hearing my husband tell her on the phone, "By next week, she won't own a single piece of land. Then we can build our future without her in the way." The night he handed me that agreement, he looked relaxed, too relaxed. Mark, his best friend, sat at the kitchen counter with a folder and a pen, ready. They said it was just a refinancing document. Daniel poured me wine, placed the papers in front of me, and said, "Sign here, darling. It's just a standard step before we expand into the new development." Out of habit, I signed. What he didn't know, what he never imagined in his wildest dreams, was that I already knew what he was planning, and I had already taken every property out of reach. This wasn't the beginning of my downfall. It was the beginning of his. The moment I signed that so-called standard agreement, something in Daniel's face changed. It wasn't visible to an untrained eye, but after 40 years of marriage, I understood his every expression. There was a flicker, relief, satisfaction, and something darker. He wasn't happy to be going out for date night. He was happy because he believed that, in that moment, he had taken everything from me without my knowledge. The man sitting across from me, smiling over candlelight, wasn't celebrating our marriage. He was celebrating what he thought was the end of my ownership and the beginning of his new life with another woman. Daniel was a master at pretending. He reached across the table, held my hand gently, and said, "This year feels different. We finally have everything we ever dreamed of." If anyone else had heard him, they would have believed he was a devoted husband. But I heard what was buried beneath his words. "Now that you've signed, the empire is mine." After dinner, instead of going home, Daniel insisted we stop by Mark Ellison's office, just to drop off the paperwork. The fact that he wanted to finalize legal documents at 9 o'clock at night was the first crack in his performance. He didn't want to wait. He couldn't wait. That urgency told me everything I needed to know. He was afraid. He believed that if I had time to think, I might start asking questions. What he didn't know was that it was already too late, not for me, for him. As we walked through the parking lot, I slowed my steps and asked casually, "Why is Savannah's car here this late?" Daniel stiffened. It was subtle, but it was there. He recovered quickly, saying, "She's just wrapping up lease agreements. She's one of our hardest workers, you know that." His voice said one thing, but his body language said another. He was nervous. Savannah wasn't there for work. She was there because she believed tonight was her victory. When we stepped inside, Savannah was already seated in the conference room. She was dressed in a fitted blazer, hair done, makeup perfect, not like an employee finishing a late shift, but like someone preparing for a new title to be announced. Mark stood at the head of the table, smiling like a man who had just closed the biggest deal of his life. Daniel guided me in with a hand on my lower back, trying to maintain the appearance of affection. It disgusted me, but I let him do it. His performance was building to its peak, and I needed every second of it to unfold exactly as he had planned. Mark began speaking in his usual authoritative tone. "Helena, thank you for coming. Tonight is just a formality to record the agreement you signed earlier. We will now proceed with the ownership transfer of Ward Properties into the new managing entity, effective immediately." I looked up, pretending confusion. "Transfer of ownership?" Daniel said it was refinancing. Mark paused. Daniel cut in quickly. "It is, sweetheart. It's just the legal language they use. You don't need to worry about it." Savannah glanced at me, her lips curling slightly, unable to hide her excitement. That look confirmed everything. She believed she was about to become the legal controller of my life's work. Not a partner, not a co-owner, the sole controller. It was the kind of confidence that only comes from promises, made in whispered conversations, too shameful to repeat in daylight. I leaned back in my chair, my heartbeat calm, my breathing steady. I watched Daniel sign his name with flourish. He looked at me with pride, like a magician waiting for applause after a grand illusion. "Your turn," he said, sliding the final page toward me. Before I could respond, Savannah whispered under her breath, too low for Daniel to hear, but not too low for me. She said, "Finally." That one word was not just proof of betrayal. It was proof of intent. In that moment, all the loyalty I had given Daniel, the decades of partnership, the sacrifices, the unquestioning trust, vanished. The marriage ended the moment she said that word. I looked at all three of them. I could have stood up and revealed the truth right then, but I didn't. A confrontation would give them time to prepare excuses, destroy evidence, manipulate narratives. No, I didn't want an argument. I wanted a reckoning. So I picked up the pen and smiled, not because I accepted my fate, but because they had already fallen into mine. They didn't know that every property they believed they were stealing was no longer mine. They didn't know the empire they thought was in their grasp had already been transferred, quietly, securely, permanently, not to my children, not to a bank, but to the one man Daniel had spent his entire life trying to avoid, my brother, Jonathan Kane, the man Daniel feared more than any enemy, because he knew Jonathan never lost. The night Daniel handed me that agreement, he believed he was executing the perfect betrayal. In his mind, it was done. I had signed away everything, and he would walk into a new life, holding full control of our $29 million property empire in one hand, with Savannah standing beside him. What he never realized was that long before he planned to take everything from me, I had already made my move. Because marriage is built on love, but empires are built on strategy. And I was not just his wife. I was the architect of the very empire he thought he could steal. The turning point was not when I discovered Daniel's affair. That hurt me emotionally, but it did not shake me. What triggered my action was something far more dangerous. I discovered that Daniel and his best friend Mark had been altering company records behind my back. They had set up a new holding company managed by Savannah. Their plan was simple: get my signature under disguise, transfer all assets to Savannah's company, then file a marital separation where I would legally own nothing. It was not an impulsive betrayal. It was a premeditated financial erasure. But Daniel made one mistake. He underestimated the fact that I paid attention, even when I didn't react. 1 month before that night, I noticed a sudden change in our company's digital dashboard. A property we acquired years ago was listed under a different entity than before. When I asked Daniel, he brushed it off as tax restructuring, but my instincts didn't rest. That evening, I called the one person Daniel had spent our entire marriage trying to keep away from our business: my brother, Jonathan Kane. Jonathan was not just my brother. He was a former federal judge with a reputation so strong that even powerful corporate executives hesitated to cross him. Daniel had always feared him, not because of family dynamics, but because Jonathan had the power to dismantle any financial deception with a single legal motion. Daniel used charm to manipulate people. Jonathan used truth to annihilate lies. When I explained my suspicions, Jonathan didn't ask for proof. He simply said, "Tell me everything you know. I'll find the rest." Within 24 hours, he had obtained copies of corporate filings, legal documents, and internal company transactions. What Daniel didn't realize was that every time he removed my name from an entity or altered a deed, a digital footprint was left behind. Jonathan followed every trail. Then Jonathan asked me the question that changed everything. "Do you want revenge or do you want control?" "Control," I answered. That one word set everything in motion. Together, we enacted a plan that Daniel did not see coming because emotionally, he believed he had already won. Jonathan drew up legal instruments transferring ownership of every property, every building, every development, every land parcel, into the Kane Family Irrevocable Trust, a protected legal entity established in our father's name, Robert Kane. The trust stipulated that I was the lifetime primary benefactor, and upon my passing, assets would go to my children and charitable housing initiatives, not my husband. This trust was ironclad, unbreakable, untouchable. To prevent Daniel from discovering the transfer prematurely, we left digital records in place showing old ownership structures, while the real transfers were sealed and registered in protected court filings that were not publicly accessible. All he saw was the illusion of control. Meanwhile, every property title was being quietly moved out from beneath him. We also set a legal trap. Jonathan contacted the Real Estate Regulatory Commission and filed a confidential fraud alert. That meant that when Daniel attempted to enforce the fraudulent transfer agreement, the commission would be alerted in real time. On the emotional side, I did something equally strategic. I gave Daniel exactly what he expected: submission. I played my role perfectly. I smiled at his plans, praised his leadership, acted as if I believed him. I even thanked Savannah in front of others for her hard work in helping us grow. Every time she smirked, every time she believed she was winning, she unknowingly walked deeper into her own exposure. When the night of the signature came, Daniel thought his trap was complete, but I had already closed mine. He believed I had just given everything to his mistress, but the truth was, I had already placed it all into the hands of the one person he was afraid to even speak to: my brother. Judge Jonathan Kane, a man who did not believe in mercy when it came to injustice. And as Daniel proudly prepared to reveal his scheme at the upcoming board meeting, he had no idea the stage was not set for my downfall. It was set for his public destruction. The boardroom was filled with confidence, but it wasn't mine. It was Daniel's. He walked in first, shoulders squared, greeting every board member with the swagger of a man who believed he now owned everything in the room. Savannah followed right behind him, not as an employee, but as if she were the new queen about to be crowned. She wore a calculated smile and took the seat beside him, no longer hiding what she believed was her new position in our empire. Mark Ellison, Daniel's best friend and attorney, stood at the head of the table looking proud, as if this was his masterpiece. I walked in calmly and took my usual seat at the far end of the large conference table. They expected confusion in my eye. Instead, I looked directly at Daniel and held his gaze until he looked away. Without realizing it, he had already shifted from victorious to defensive. He just didn't know why yet. Daniel stood, tapping his pen on the polished wood. "Thank you all for coming. Today marks a new chapter for Ward Properties," he began with practiced confidence. "As majority holder of the company assets, I have finalized a strategic leadership transfer to ensure long-term stability." He gestured to Savannah. "This is our new managing partner, Ms. Savannah Brooks." For a moment, the room fell silent in shock. The board members turned to me, confused. Daniel smiled and slid a document across the table toward me, as if presenting a ceremonial final blow. "Helena has signed the agreement, transferring controlling interest. This is simply the formal announcement." Savannah lifted her chin, ready to receive applause she thought she had earned. But before Daniel could continue, the conference room doors opened. In walked my brother, Jonathan Kane, followed by 2 federal real estate regulators and an attorney from the State Property Commission. The atmosphere changed instantly. The board members straightened in their seats, recognizing Jonathan immediately. Daniel froze. The color drained from his face as if all oxygen had been pulled from the room. Jonathan didn't speak to Daniel. He spoke to the board. "This meeting is now under legal review," he announced with a commanding authority that silenced the room. "Mrs. Helena Ward has filed a fraud investigation against Daniel Ward and Mark Ellison for attempted unlawful transfer of assets, forged intent, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation." Mark stumbled to his feet. "This is outrageous. You have no right to interfere in a corporate transition," he barked, attempting to assert control. But one of the regulators cut him off. "We have every right. A transfer exceeding $10 million in property value falls under federal oversight, and we have irrefutable evidence that it was obtained through deception." Daniel stood, trying to salvage authority. "There must be some misunderstanding." Helena signed willingly. Jonathan looked at him sharply and replied, "She signed what she was told was a refinancing document, not a full transfer." He then placed a thick file on the table. "These are the recordings, emails, and legal drafts showing your intention to remove her ownership while planning to divorce her immediately after." Savannah, who had been smirking moments earlier, now sat frozen. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for a way out. Jonathan continued, "And since Savannah Brooks knowingly accepted this transfer under false pretenses, she will be investigated as a co-conspirator." Daniel turned to me, desperation appearing in his eyes for the first time. "Helena, you don't understand." I stood up slowly. "No, Daniel, I understand perfectly. You tried to erase me from the empire I built. You tried to give everything I worked for to a woman who didn't lay one brick, sign one contract, or earn 1 cent of it." I reached for my folder and pulled out the real documents, the ones he had no knowledge of. "These," I said, laying them out on the table, "are the recorded deeds of transfer for every single property in our empire, every building, every parcel of land, every title. They were already moved 6 weeks ago into the Kane family irrevocable trust." I looked directly at Savannah, "Which means, even if your fraudulent document had gone through, you would have received nothing. There was nothing left to take." Daniel's knees buckled, and he sat down heavily. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Savannah's expression crumbled. She turned to Daniel in disbelief. "You told me everything was under your control." Jonathan stepped forward, placing the official trust papers before the board. "As of now, Helena Ward does not just retain control. She has full legal protection. Any attempt to challenge the trust will result in immediate forfeiture and criminal prosecution." At that moment, the regulators informed Daniel and Mark that they were being placed under investigation. Savannah received notice that her real estate license was suspended pending trial. The board members, still stunned, began to applaud, not in celebration of Daniel's downfall, but in respect for my strength and foresight. Daniel buried his face in his hands, realizing the truth he had spent months ignoring. He hadn't outsmarted me. He had walked directly into the trap I laid, built not from revenge, but from wisdom. As the meeting ended and Jonathan escorted the officials out, I turned back one last time to face Daniel. "You tried to build your future on my destruction," I said softly, "but you forgot one thing. I built this world, and I decide who keeps it." Then I walked out of the room, not as Daniel's wife, but as the woman who ended his illusions and reclaimed her empire forever. As I walked out of that boardroom, I did not look back. The echoes of papers shuffling, whispers of shock, and the quiet collapse of Daniel's world faded behind me. The weight I had carried for years of suspicion, betrayal, and silent heartbreak lifted with every step I took toward the exit. I wasn't leaving as a defeated wife. I was leaving as the rightful owner of my life, my work, and my legacy. The empire he tried to claim wasn't built on his ambition. It was built on my vision. And now, every brick of it stood protected under my name and in the trust of the one person who would guard it with his life, my brother, Judge Jonathan Kane. In the days that followed, the news broke publicly. Media outlets reported the attempted fraudulent transfer and the legal action taken by federal authorities. Daniel's reputation, once polished and untouchable, shattered almost overnight. Savannah disappeared from public view after losing her real estate license, and Mark faced disciplinary hearings that would likely end his career permanently. But while the world watched their downfall, I focused on something far more important, rebuilding the parts of my life that truly mattered. My phone rang constantly. Some calls were from people expressing shock, others from women who whispered stories of their own fears they had never voiced before. "I think my husband is doing the same thing," one woman confessed. "I've never felt brave enough to question it until now." That's when I realized my story wasn't just a personal victory. It was a warning and a source of strength for countless others who had been silently ignored, dismissed, or manipulated into giving away everything they had. My daughter Vanessa came to stay with me temporarily. One evening, we sat together on the balcony overlooking the lake. The sunset reflected across the water in shades of gold and rose. She turned to me and said, "Mom, I didn't just watch you win. I watched you rise." I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of pride. For years, Daniel had tried to isolate me from my children, to make them believe I was incapable of managing our empire alone. But standing there with my daughter, I realized something powerful. When truth is revealed, relationships built on love do not break, they heal. My son Christopher, who had been distant for years under Daniel's influence, called me one morning. His voice was quiet, shaken. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I see everything now. Dad lied to me. He lied about you. Can we start over?" I didn't hesitate. "There is nothing to start over from," I answered. "You are my son. You always have a place with me. Betrayal may have come from my husband, but healing came from my children. As for my legacy, I made a decision that defined my future. I transformed Ward Properties into the Kane Housing Initiative, a foundation that develops housing projects for struggling single mothers, widows, and veterans. I didn't just keep my empire, I redefined it. No longer was it a symbol of wealth. It became a weapon against the very kind of injustice I endured. People often ask me if I regret marrying Daniel. My answer is always the same. Regret is for those who don't learn. I learned. I acted, and I won. My life was not destroyed by betrayal. It was reshaped by it. Sometimes the greatest blessing you will ever receive comes disguised as loss. Sometimes the moment you think everything is ending is actually the moment your true life begins. Daniel once believed that love made me weak, but love did not weaken me. Blind trust did. And when the blindfold came off, I discovered that my strength had been there all along, waiting for the moment it was needed most. I walked through fire, not to burn, but to forge steel. And now, as I stand in the home I built with integrity, surrounded by peace instead of deception, I know this one truth more clearly than ever. You cannot stop a woman who knows her worth. You cannot steal from a woman who already secured her future. And you cannot win against a woman who has learned how to play the game better than those who wrote the rules. If this story opened your eyes or gave you strength, make sure to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your voice matters, and your story could be the one that saves someone else's life next.